Horror represents the shadow of culture, of media, and of media studies, the unintegrated part of the whole that draws power from our very reluctance to confront it and acknowledge it as, in fact, integral to the human psyche. How can people be so evil? What happens after death? How are we to cope with the inevitability of illness and mortality, as well as other existential fears such as loneliness, abandonment, or not being in control of oneself? These are the sorts of questions that horror, with a greater or lesser degrees of artfulness, seeks to answer. In recent years, we have seen the genre of horror grow and evolve with different subgenres that catch the attention of its consumers. Horror seems to go through style cycles or eras that have peak points of interest such as zombies, paranormal, slasher, and more. Filmmaker Dylan Vibert explained the evolution of horror thus far as he stated, "If I could overgeneralize the last few decades, the 80s was slasher flicks such as Freddy, Jason, Michael, etc. The 90s were monster or creature flicks such as Jurassic Park, Anaconda, Godzilla, and Blair Witch. The 2000s was torture porn, like Saw and Hostel, and as of late it's been social commentary, such as Get Out, It Follows, Hereditary, and Invisible Man. Consumers seem to enjoy horror as it's a way to cope with their own everyday lives, but what about horror is sticking with us? Where do we go from here? And where exactly are we coming from? Whether it's in books, films, or video games, areas of science fiction, fantasy, and horror have become a valued interest for a specific community. Atmosphere and suspense are big factors to make a piece of horror immersive for the consumer. While speaking with Vincent Lade, developer of The Swine and most recently Witching Hour, he expressed that horror is a mix of atmosphere, storytelling, and interesting characters, mostly the villain or monster. A good horror game can create an environment that pulls the player in with strong audio, pacing, and scares when needed. When the climax of a movie comes, it builds emotions in a negative way, such as the main character being attacked, and is later transferred to enjoyment, such as the character avoiding or catching the attacker. Many films and video games have the idea that for something to be scary, it has to be dark. The film Dead Snow was a great example of thinking outside of that box and creating different aspects of what makes a landscape scary or unsettling, as they included shots of a vast, open, snowy landscape, making it quite the opposite of traditional characteristics. With the increase of digital content being produced, horror is spreading in different forms rather than just in movies and video games. Within the film industry, classic horror icons have been created specifically from the slasher era, and have recently made a resurgence to the big screen from films such as Friday the 13th, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Many classic films are resurfacing with remakes or new additions to the original stories, such as the 2022 Scream film, Netflix's Texas Chainsaw Massacre film, and the newly reimagined timeline of the Halloween series. While speaking with Matt Sears, an independent filmmaker, he expressed his thoughts on classic movies resurfacing.
I think it's because they're already popular. I think, especially after COVID, there's a willingness, like studios don't want to take as much of a risk, especially now. But even so, like before, they didn't really want to have as much of a risk. Like they want to make sure that the film that they put out returns on their investment, I guess. And so these franchises, they've got like a massive horror base already, and they know that if they make one, then that all those fans are going to go see it. And I don't think that's the right attitude to go into make. Like I don't think you make a film because you know it's going to be successful. You make a film because it's a good story, or it's or it adds something to the series. It shouldn't ever just be about whether it's going to be popular or whether it's going to make your money back. But unfortunately, as like Hollywood's a business, that's a massive part of it, and they have to do that. The other reason is just there's so much that's already been done now. It's really hard to tell an original story that's good or isn't like something else. So if you've got this kind of back catalogue of all these old films that you feel are maybe a bit dated now, I guess they see that as like, oh, we could, we've got this. Why don't we just remake this and sort of introduce it to a new audience, or like an audience that hasn't seen the original?
These horror icons have made an impact and have seemingly become the face of horror for many of its fans. One clip posted by a child's mother captures her daughter's excitement when Michael Myers shows up to her birthday party.
She is. Marco, look! Ari! Ari! Where is he? Look over there! Run, mommy, run! I love you.
This little girl knows exactly who Michael Myers is and clearly shows excitement when she realizes he is there at her party. The genre has not only had an impact on adult viewers, but has also caught interest in younger viewers as well. Aside from film, the horror section of the gaming industry has made a dramatic change in production. As classic horror games like Resident Evil have continued their releases and improved gameplay mechanics and functionality, there has been a significant increase in indie horror game development. Many of these indie horror studios such as Vincent Lade, Gun Interactive, and Straight Back Games have gotten inspiration from older PS1 style horror games such as Resident Evil, Silent Hill, as well as the classic slasher style films. But now we are beginning to see an interesting pattern emerging regarding intellectual properties. Recent horror games have had an increased use of pre-existing IPs, or intellectual properties, possibly as a way to gain interest in their pre-existing game ideas or pay tribute to the original works. One example would be the popular game Dead by Daylight, developed by Behavior Interactive. Dead by Daylight is a 4v1 asymmetrical horror game where 4 survivors had to escape trials from a killer by powering generators in order to open the exit doors. The creators of this game have licensed killers and survivors from popular classic horror movies such as Michael Myers and Laurie Strode from Halloween, The Pig and Detective Tapp from Saw, and many more. Another use of IPs for video games would be getting a full license to create a game around. Some examples of this would be Saber Interactive's Evil Dead the game, as well as Gun Interactive's Friday the 13th the game, and their upcoming release, Texas Chainsaw Massacre the game. Friday the 13th the game was a great success, as well as Evil Dead the game, and Gun Interactive's new installment has gathered a significant audience that is eager for their release. When speaking with Wes Keltner, the lead developer of Gun Interactive, I asked him how their team went about releasing Friday the 13th the game, in efforts to gain attention for consumers and avoid being lost in the new releases section.
Once we had the license, then we had an even clearer path on what that game was going to become, and then we took to Kickstarter, et cetera, et cetera. But what we knew about the game was it's going to be fun playing as Jason. Like, we knew that from the rip. So, because it's a power trip, right? And that's what a lot of games put the emphasis on. If you're playing an RPG, if you're playing whatever, right, is you get to be something in this game that you can't normally be in real life. And getting to become something as iconic as Jason, we just knew that was like, that's a home run, we know. So we need to focus on counselor gameplay. We need to make that fun. So we spent a lot of time making the aspect of that fun, but we didn't want to bury the lead, right, which is our journalism term, right? We knew when we were marketing the game and showing it, like, you put Jason first and foremost, like always, and show the different ones that we've made, so that horror fans that love that series know that we're taking this seriously, and that we put authenticity above everything else. So, like, it's the exact mask, it's the exact outfit he wore, that's the exact weapon he carried. Tried to be as one-to-one to the film as we possibly could. But to people that just go, oh yeah, I know who Jason Voorhees is, they may not realize that, you know, there's 11 or 12 different versions of Jason, right? And they all visually look different. They possibly don't know that. So we want to make sure that to super fans that they could look at the marketing materials that we were putting out and saying like, oh my gosh, like these guys are doing it right. But then make each beat that we do in marketing be about incredibly creative kills, because again, we knew that's why people went to see those films throughout the 80s and 90s, was because all the kills that Jason does was very creative. So any marketing piece that we put out was very much focused on show the correct, authentic Jason, and then show interesting kills and get right to it. Like, don't hit them with a bunch of boring stuff. Just right from the rip. The term my creative director kept talking about was come out and punch him in the mouth. That was like what he would always like sort of jokingly say in terms of like the pace, the style, the fervor of our marketing was always very much like Jason, because Jason shows up and he's kind of bull in a china shop. He just comes in and he's a brute, right? So that's how we did all of our marketing to assure that people understood we were doing this thing right.
Game development engines such as Unity and Unreal Engine have made tremendous progress, making it much easier for developers to make their game ideas a reality. In an interview with Joe Fender, the CEO of Straight Back Games, he expressed to me that with the advances game engines are making these days, it's almost as if anyone can make a horror game.
Yeah, I think the entry bar for making games now is quite low, with the help of things like Unity and Unreal. They've done great jobs, but it kind of means anyone can make a horror game now if they really wanted to. So there's a lot of trash coming out, and I say trash, it's not that polished.
As of 2022, the leading PC video game platforms for horror games are both Steam and itch.io. itch.io currently has over 24,000 video games listed under the horror tag, and continues to grow as more games are released. Many horror games on itch.io are free and even contain characters inspired by non-horror intellectual properties. Developers are making characters from movies and games that are not necessarily scary, such as kid movies, and are reimagining them in a dark and unsettling fashion to gain interest from the consumers. A few examples would be implementing Shrek or The Cat in the Hat as the main antagonist. These games are using an established IP and creating a small game that they release to the community of itch.io for free. These games gain some traction as they are already established subjects, and if the rest of the experience goes well, then it gets upvoted. Another example of this type of structure has to do with community-created ideas that are adapted by game developers, such as Siren Head or The Backrooms. Siren Head was created in 2018 by Trevor Henderson, who is an artist. Siren Head was inspired by Slenderman, who was a previous community creation turned video game. The first image of Siren Head was him standing in a graveyard, and then snowballed into Henderson posting more images to create lore around the creature. The Backrooms originated from an anonymous 4chan post with an image of a yellow hallway. The Backrooms is a maze of endless hallways and offices that individuals end up in after no-clipping through reality. No-clipping is a video game reference, meaning when someone passes through an intentional barrier, such as the floor. The Backrooms has since expanded into short found-footage films posted on YouTube by Kane Pixels, and shortly after was picked up by the indie game community and brought to life in video games such as Escape the Backrooms, The Backrooms World, and many more. Many of these community-created ideas are lumped into the realm of creepypasta. Creepypasta is a website where writers can submit their own written horror stories with the world. Other popular community creations from this realm include Jeff the Killer, The Rake, and Aoki. All of these creations have their own backstories, including both creator and fan art for visual reference. When it comes to using IPs in horror, some are more controversial than others. Following the 2021 film The Curse of Humpty Dumpty, directed by Scott Jeffrey, one piece of intellectual property that has people talking lately is Winnie the Pooh. Winnie the Pooh recently entered the public domain, and as a result, images were released of a live-action Winnie and Piglet with the movie title of Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. This concept has gained a lot of both positive and negative interest from the community. Some consumers believe that this will ruin Winnie the Pooh for them, and their children will be exposed to a character they enjoyed growing up but now turned evil. Like the developers that have started implementing family-friendly characters like Shrek and the Cat in the Hat in their video game ideas, creators in general are running with the idea of a child's toy or child's TV show being more evil than friendly.
Skeleton?
You shouldn't have opened that box, short face. But now you let me out, and I'll have your hide.
In October of 2016, a TV series called Channel Zero aired with their first season called Candle Cove, based on a creepypasta written by Chris Straub. This was a chilling series where children are going missing and the main character suspects it has to do with a show they watched while growing up called Candle Cove. Another example of creating evil within something not known to be that falls into the video game industry would be the popular indie horror game Poppy Playtime, developed by Mob Entertainment. In this game, you take on the role of a former employee of a toy factory that later returns after hearing that the other workers had disappeared. The main antagonists of the game are the toys that have come alive. Both Channel Zero Candle Cove and Poppy Playtime are examples of injecting horror into something that traditionally wouldn't be.
It's 10:52.
Recently, the subject of lore has become more present, and horror is a genre that significantly benefits from it. Recent horror has had an increased amount of lore as film and game development studios begin to look more long-term in building not just one story but a series of stories that share a common world. More recent movie series that have had a lot of focus on this would be the Conjuring movie world, as they have created this universe where the Conjuring series, Annabelle series, and a few more films like The Nun all tied together in one story. Another example of this would be the Resident Evil video game series, as it all ties into Raccoon City, Umbrella Corp, and Stars. Harriman Donovan, creator of Lights Off LLC, expressed that he is not a fan of the classic slasher films due to their lack of lore.
These days, every company is trying to make a cinematic universe, for better or worse. But the process in due so forces the screenwriters to world build, which I think is a good thing.
Forcing the writers to world build shows the consumers that they care about their projects and want their story to continue further than just a single film. World building also helps cut down on inconsistencies if a movie is successful enough for a follow-up film. Horror has been fairly persistent with its audience and has gained more availability in recent years due to streaming platforms especially Amazon, Shudder, and Screambox, and short-form apps like TikTok and YouTube. There has been an increase in production of horror, whether it be full-length films, short films, video games, or even social media posts. Harriman Donovan created Lights Are Off LLC, where he creates 3D animated horror videos for the internet, and he stated,
I think it is a genre that was never really fully explored for the last couple decades. I hate slasher movies and generic horror tropes, but the concept of building fear or even just a general sense of unease can have so many approaches. The creativity can be boundless, and even a classic jump scare can be expressed in many different ways. I think the cost to make an indie film has dropped dramatically, allowing for new visions to be explored. Currently, I think for the past couple of years, Jordan Peele has been responsible for advancing the genre. But I think the genre will continue to evolve and expand, and we are going to see a lot of cool new stories appearing over the next 10 years.
After this response, I wanted to ask what the next 5 to 10 years looked like to him, in which he replied,
As a whole, I think we are going to see two things. A lot of garbage, between big studios trying to capitalize on the growing genre, and a ton of bad indie films trying to make their debut in the genre. I see heavy saturation coming our way. I also see the horror genre not only blossoming into what it can be, but also bleeding into every other genre. Horror will be pushed and tested and experimented on much larger scale these next few years, and I think it will inspire other genres to explore what else their own genre could be. The most important thing that I believe over the next decade, storytellers will let go of conventional ways of thinking and evolve what it means to create fear on screen, and explore new and improved ways of bringing those ideas to life.
This is my home, which I am leaving the comforts of for the weekend to explore the Blair Witch.
In 1999, Eduardo Sanchez and Daniel Myrick broke away from the traditional ways film was being produced and introduced what we now know as the found footage style of filmmaking. This style uses more grainy, distorted shots to induce fear in a different aspect than films of its time. Now, in recent years, many films have picked up this style and made it their own. Adrian DeGus, creator of AllHorror.com, which is the largest horror movie database online, gave his thoughts on the current production standards of the film industry. I'm not actually a big fan of production standards these days. Hollywood horror has become too polished, which often takes me out of the movie. When a movie set looks like a movie set and every other scene is CGI, it reminds you that it's only a movie. Indie movies tend to do a better job. The found footage style films present themselves in a way where the camera is held by the characters, attempting to make the viewers feel as if they are part of the film as well. This can also tie into films that introduce the idea that it is based on a true story. The movie plot can be loosely based on a true story, but then twisted in a way that makes the viewers think that the story is a lot different and scarier. Until research, viewers would not know how much of the movie's plot is accurate to the actual event. The realism, or possible realism, is a factor that consumers are interested in. Overall, horror is a respected genre that will continue to be explored. An increase in indie horror seems to follow current trends, while higher-end horror has always and continues to acknowledge current events and social trends. Dylan Vibert expressed that he believes in the coming years we will see more psychological horror, and though I agree with him, I also believe that these psychological horror films will either focus on or significantly acknowledge our current events such as politics, the pandemic, riots, shootings, and etc. Horror itself is a genre that has a lot of potential to grow as well as recreate. I believe the genre will continue to evolve, but the indie productions will continue to increase and gain popularity in film and other forms, just as the video game industry has done already. The advancements in technology have made it easier and more affordable for indie creators to flesh out and produce their ideas into a form of media. So, to answer the question of where horror is headed, the overall combined thought of resources I've gathered express we are moving toward more of an indie-controlled production time, where the higher-end studios will continue to do well, but many indie films will make their way into popularity. Ideas of indie creators can be picked up and inspired by many different aspects and subjects they are exposed to, but have the freedom to deliver these ideas in whichever way they choose, as they do not have such a guided path as high-end production companies. On top of the strength of indie productions, the idea of more psychological style horror has a sense of focus, particularly surrounding recent traumatic world events.